So, can an SUV really be sporty? Well, this is the BMW XM40i. It's BMW's take on the ultimate all-rounder. With a 0 to 60 of just 4.8 seconds, it sure looks impressive on paper, but do the numbers really tell the whole story? Well, today we're going to find out by doing some realistic driving on some very realistic roads. My name's Tom and you're watching Paragon Cars. Let's go. At the front we have the B58 inline 6-cylinder engine. Known for being one of the best inline 6s ever made, it's certainly got the muscle, with 360 horsepower and a solid 500 Nm of torque. It's no wonder the 0 to 60 is under 5 seconds, but what about the 30 to 70 sprint? Let's find out. As you can see by the 30 to 70 time, this is an SUV that means business. With a time of just 4.29 seconds, it smashes the A35 AMG's time and takes its place at third on the leaderboard. So what about the inside? Well, funnily enough, this X4 has a similar interior to the new 3 Series and 4 Series Grand Coupe. It follows the usual formula of low-slung sports seats, a slightly too chunky steering wheel, and an infotainment system that really does just work. The optional digital dials fitted to this car can be configured in a few different ways depending on your driving mode. They're not as flash as Audi's or Mercedes' system, but the graphics are sharp and the screen itself doesn't lag much. Then infotainment wise, this is the upgraded 10-inch ProNav screen. It's easy to navigate and it does actually give you the best of both worlds in how it can be controlled. You can navigate using the scroll wheel or just use it like a normal touchscreen if you want to. Personally, the scroll wheel is the one for me as I don't have to take my eyes off the road to use it. In terms of storage, the X4 actually has plenty to offer. There's big door bins with cutouts for 2-litre bottles, a large glove box and a secret little cubby for your stash. Then, like many BMWs, this X4 puts its power through the mighty ZF 8-speed torque converter gearbox. I'll show you just how good it is later, but first let's take a look at the back seats. The rear offers a fairly good amount of room considering this is a coupe body shape. People under about 6'2" will be absolutely fine back here. Then amenities like climate control and armrests come through to the back as well, making this a pleasure to be driven in. You've then got RGB ambient lighting and nearly the same amount of storage as the front. Coming to the boot, you'll find 525 litres of space, smaller than the equivalent X3, but to be honest it's still a fundamentally large amount of room. The only time you'll need to fold the seats down is when you're carrying taller items as the sloping roofline eats into the vertical room somewhat. Okay, let's get on the road and see if an SUV can put a smile on my face. So what's this BMW X4 M40i like to drive? Well, we're going to start off around town as usual, then we're going to make our way onto the motorway, see what MPG we can get, and then we're going to do what everyone wants to see, some twisty road driving. But this is where you're going to spend most of your time. And I have to say, as good as this car is, the suspension is surprisingly stiff. Certainly stiffer than you'd think it would be. And going over these bumps here, it feels quite a lot like a saloon car. And I know to some people that might mean, oh, it's got to be uncomfortable. But no, it's not uncomfortable at all, this car. What it does do though is make me excited for some twisty road driving. Theoretically, that should mean this car handles pretty well. Steering at low speeds is also pretty light. It could be lighter, but I think they're reserving that for the bigger models like the X6 and the X7. They have to reserve some sort of luxury. Right, let's see what the parking's like. In terms of parking, this car's got all-round parking sensors and a reverse camera, and boy, does it need it. The rearward visibility in this is possibly the worst I think I've ever seen from a car. The window itself is small, but it's the fact that the headrests on the rear seats also get in the way of your view. Plus, because this is a sporty SUV, the turning circle isn't that good. So there are a couple of compromises to make this car as sporty as it is. But I'm sure later I'll be happy to sacrifice them. Coming out of junctions, you've got a ZF8 speed gearbox that I mentioned in the intro. And the reason this gearbox is so good is because it's as fast as a DSG, or certainly close enough, but it has that buttery smoothness that really matches the personality of this inline 6 engine. It just means driving around town, it almost feels electric. Okay, let's reset the trip computer and see what MPG we can get. Right, let's see what this car's like in sports mode around a roundabout. So put it in Sports Plus, downshifts a few gears. You can put the gearbox in Sport. This will downshift even more gears. Throttle response is increased, steering weight is heavy. And because this is an SUV, they've kind of made the steering more direct initially. The turning is really good for this car. And one thing the B58 is really good at is just delivering the torque across pretty much the whole rev range. For now, we're going to leave it in Eco Pro and see what kind of MPG we can get on the motorway, as the less times you have to visit a petrol station, the better. Right, let's talk about the other features of this car then. We'll start with road noise, and because this is an SUV, you've got more distance between you and the road. So road noise is kept to an absolute minimum in this car. And these X4s are standard, they come with run flat tyres, and to be honest, I would just get rid of them because they add a lot of noise when you don't really want it. Then in terms of wind noise, they've done a pretty good job actually. It's a little bit better than the older 3 Series we reviewed a couple of months ago. They just seem to have gotten rid of that sort of slight buffeting noise around the top of the roof. It's not quite as good as an Audi Q5, but it's not far off. It certainly wouldn't annoy you over a long journey. In terms of comfort, this is one thing BMW always get right. Not only are the seats comfortable themselves, you can adjust the pitch of the base and then obviously recline them. You've got adjustable bolsters so you can relax them when you're on the motorway, allowing you to move around in your seat. You can then tighten them up, meaning it keeps you in place when you're doing some sportier driving. But one thing that BMW do better than Mercedes and Audi is the seat positioning. I can get so much lower in this seat compared to something like an Audi Q5 or a Mercedes GLC. And it just means I feel closer to the ground, more in control of what I'm doing with the car. And for something like an SUV that's supposed to be sporty, that's actually really, really important. If you sit too high up in a car, it just means you feel like you're falling over when you go around corners. Whereas this, it feels tight and agile, even when you're just driving normally. Then in terms of interior quality, it's the usual BMW. It's not as flash as an Audi or a Mercedes, but the actual fit and finish is slightly better. You've got really nice quality soft touch materials on the door cards, the dash, all the way down to your feet. And these newer BMWs like the G80 series, 3 series, just have a really solid feel to them. Everything feels like it's just been bolted together really, really tightly. And that translates to 0 rattles. This car has absolutely 0 rattles, even after 2 years. And it just means doing longer journeys is really pleasurable in this car. In terms of visibility on the motorway, well, thankfully it's a lot better than the rearward visibility. The A-pillars, whilst they are quite big, they're like triangular shaped, so you can sort of see around them quite easily. The B-pillars are also quite big, but they're quite far back, so you can check your blind spot easily as well. There's also a curved bit of glass, which pretty much every German manufacturer does now, so it means you can see in your blind spot basically. Suspension and steering also feel pretty good on the motorway. The suspension, you can tell it's still the sportier car over something like an X4 20D, but it's just about comfortable enough to a point where it won't annoy you over a longer journey. A lot of journalists have said the model above this, the X3M Competition, is just too stiff for UK roads. And I think I'd have to agree with them on that one. This car is borderline too stiff. It's very close to the Ford Focus RS actually. And that surprised me quite a lot. There's one other spec that I really like about this car, and it's the Harman Kardon sound system. Older BMWs had pretty pants sound systems, to be honest. They always sounded really mushy when you turn the volume all the way up, and everything kind of blended together in this like sound smoothie. Whereas this one, it separates the bass from the mids really well. The highs could be a little bit better. It's still not quite as good as the Audi Q5's Bang & Olufsen sound system, but it's really not that far off. Coming off the motorway then, we managed about 35 miles to the gallon. As you can see, it's actually still going up. So on a longer journey, you might actually be able to manage 40 in a 360 horsepower, 6-cylinder sporty SUV. It's amazingly impressive how efficient these B58s are. Right, let's get on some twisty roads. Right, onto some twisty stuff then. Put the car in sport and in manual, and we can shift using these really nice high quality paddles actually. And this is where that low seating position I mentioned earlier really comes into play. You just feel so much more in control of this car. And the brakes are good too, it means you don't run over wildlife. The adaptive dampers in sport really come into their own as well. It just allows you to really play with this car. Everything feels so nice and tight. And going around that corner back there, the rear is what kicked out first. Of course, this has got BMW's well-known xDrive system. And most of you know, but if you don't, it sends pretty much all the power to the rear wheels most of the time. It's like the opposite way round to a Haldex system. So it only ever sends power to the front to pull you out of a corner, which means you do actually get the best of both worlds. You get that rear drive bias feel whilst having the security of a tied down front end. And the ZF8 speed is just absolutely faultless. It is nearly just as quick as a DSG, and it even gives you a little bit of a kick in the back when you change gears in sport mode. And coming around these tight corners, you're quite thankful for that tight steering. And this car, I really don't know why you'd need the M version of this car. This is so fast already, and it means you can only really go through one gear on a B road. Has a very nice sound to it as well. And that's the thing that's so good about this B58 is it just has power across the entire rev range. So when you want it to, it drives like a diesel, but then you still get 2,000 more RPM to play with when you want to have some fun. And you know what? I think this car is actually too capable for its own good. Because it has so much grip and so much capability, it kind of detracts from a bit of the fun you'd have on a B road. To really extract the performance out of this car, you're going to have to be going way faster than the speed limit. But that rear drive bias is so much fun. But having said all that, if you do absolutely have to get an SUV, and you do absolutely have to get something sporty, I think this car is the perfect compromise. It's got the room for 4 adults, it's got the height that you need to do some really basic off-roading, and it has a dynamic enough chassis to keep you entertained on a B road. And that's not to mention, this B58 has a reputation for being highly tunable. If you wanted to, you could put mods in this car, taking it all the way up to 700 horsepower. And yeah, why not? Why not have a daily driver that flies under the radar like this does, handles like a sports car, and has the power to rip your face off? Well, we are going to head back to the dealership now, so as always, I hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, give it a like, and why not subscribe to our channel? Not only can you see all the stock we have for sale, including this car, you'll also be able to see more videos like this one. I'll see you guys on the next one. Goodbye.